All right, it's 11. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, you can begin in 5, 4, 3.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the community members who are here, educational partners who are here, as well as our team from the California Department of Education and from other community-based organizations. We appreciate you all being here with us this morning. This is a very important topic on addressing disproportionate discipline in school. Next slide, please. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to really start off with photos of our children. I like to ground any type of presentation, any webinar with these type of photos, because this is the reason why we are here. We're doing the work for our students in California. So again, thank you all for being here. As you move through the presentation, please keep those photos of our children in your mind as you're here supporting your learning. Thank you. On this slide here, the 22-23 California budget will almost triple the amount of per pupil investment from a decade ago, providing us with resources and opportunity to address inequities and really do things different, transforming California schools. We've often said in the past, we don't have the money, we don't have the budget. However, with funding at its optimal level right now, there are a lot of different things that we can do to really make changes in our schools and really transform education. These are the superintendent's initiatives, and at California Department of Education, we really support those and we're behind them. And we know that a lot of our LEAs have embraced the initiatives and they're looking at what they can do to transform schools. Next slide, please. Our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, will be joining us today. This is an important topic to him. Right now, he's at the state legislature talking and testifying, really talking about this topic as well as other topics pertaining to education. When Superintendent Thurmond arrives, we'll take a break so we can really listen to him as he will frame our discussion for us today. So we do think about him while he's testifying to the legislature now. And again, when he gets on, we will pivot to him. Next slide, please. And now we'll have some words from our State Board of Education President, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond. Dr. Darling-Hammond is past president of the American Educational Research Association and recipient of its awards for distinguished contributions to research, lifetime achievement, research review, and research policy. She is also a member of the American Association of Arts and Sciences and of the National Academy of Education. From 1994 to 2001, she was executive director of the National Commission on Teaching and America's Future, whose 1996 report, What Matters Most, Teaching for America's Future, was named one of the most influential reports affecting U.S. education in that decade. I'm also privileged to have been on a variety of calls with Dr. Darling-Hammond. As I studied my master's program at Cal State Hayward, we actually read several of her articles. So it was such an honor when I started to be in the same space as her. I don't think I've ever told you that, but again, we've read a lot of your articles. And so Dr. Darling-Hammond, we'll turn it over to you, as well as we'll allow you to be able to share your screen. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Will. It's really an important topic, and I'll look forward to sharing my screen as soon as I get permission to do that. I'm still waiting to get permission to share the screen. So I think your screen needs to go down so that mine can go up. There we go. And as you noted, I do spend, my time significantly doing research, and I'm going to say a little bit about some of what we know about this really important topic and how it might inform the way that we move forward. And so we do know that a lot about the effects of exclusionary discipline and the possibilities for other approaches to the problem that you have already gotten us thinking about. We know that, for example, school exclusions have been beginning to decrease in this country, but they were going up for many, many, many years with zero tolerance policies across the country. And in every context, there are disparate outcomes of exclusionary discipline, suspensions and expulsions with Black students, Native American students, Latinx students being those most likely to be excluded. And the data show that that is not because there's differential misbehavior, but there are disproportionately harsh consequences for students of color around the same kinds of behaviors. The effects of the exclusionary discipline policies that have been underway are that, in fact, while we use things like school suspensions to with the intention of making schools safer, they ultimately have not worked to achieve that goal. But they do increase alienation and disengagement for the students who are excluded. They actually undermine their academic progress, which then creates a vicious cycle of then being more disengaged, being more sometimes oppositional, undermining overall school climate, reducing academic progress, and actually increasing dropout rates at the end of the day, often setting students on a school to prison pipeline. And so there have got to be other ways to manage the process. And I'm trying to get my screen to move forward, but it won't do that. So I might have to go out of sharing and go back in. Sometimes that happens and things get stuck. Here we go. We're all learning to manage technologies. So there are alternatives to exclusion that exist, and we've now got a lot of research. One of those kinds of alternatives is restorative justice or restorative practices, which are becoming more widespread as schools are looking for alternatives to exclusion. There are two big areas of work that those engaged in restorative practices undertake. One is community building practices, where using things like community building circles, social emotional learning, there's a real explicit attention to creating a school community in which everyone has voice and feels membership, so that that climate of being able to share concerns, being able to know each other and develop empathy is established. And then when there are challenges, there are repair practices to reconnect people to the community and rebuild the community in productive ways, making amends, resolving issues, taking productive steps in the future through things like mediation and harm repair circles and other strategies that are well developed in a number of the strategies that schools have been adopting. The key thing about this is that you have to build a community in order to then attach students to it and then work to keep them attached to the community. Right now, with students having experienced a lot of trauma in the course of the pandemic and all of the events that have wrapped around that, it is quite common for kids to be experiencing the after effects of that stress and trauma, which cause dysregulated behavior, may create both anxiety that is under the surface, may create some disengagement, may need to help be identified so the students can be connected to the resources that they need. And so school exclusion as the only strategy is really problematic because it doesn't give room for any of those healing activities. This quote is from a young person who ultimately became a restorative practices coach, but was describing his journey out of school. He said, I dropped out of school. Actually, they kicked me out because I didn't want to give them my head. It was real zero tolerance. I was expelled for defiance for putting a hat in my backpack instead of giving it to them. And I had bad experiences since preschool. So it was easy for me to be like, forget this. And I don't know if people realize that actually there's a huge amount of exclusion that goes on in preschool that also tends to be very disparate. But this young person got involved in some other gang activity after being let go out of school and had the choice to either go to jail or to back to school, and went to another school this is a pseudonym, but it was a school in Oakland that had taken up restorative practices. And he said, after 2 weeks, I realized it was the first time I ever wanted to be at school. Like, we got circled today. I got to go. I wanted to be in class, do projects, interact, be one of the first students called, and I felt good being up here. And all my friends from before I went to this academy are dead or in jail. Without restorative practices, I'd probably be dead or in jail too. As I noted, this young person is now a restorative coach, and this is a story that's part of a study that we just recently conducted at LPI, which found that greater use of restorative practices actually makes schools safer and students healthier and higher achieving. The more these practices are present in the schools, as recognized by students and reported on their Healthy Kids surveys, the less misbehavior, the less gang membership, changes in the level of bullying, less depression, suicidal ideation, more academic achievement, higher GPAs, and stronger school climate can result. And so it really depends on how we approach things in school and the questions that we ask. What happened? What were you thinking? What have you thought about? What do you think needs to happen to make things right? And for those who've been affected by conflict, what can we do to make things right? So that approach, while some worry that it will undermine safety, actually has been demonstrated to support safety. I want to just thank all of the folks who are going to participate in this conversation this morning for really leaning in and helping us see how it is that we can make a difference in our schools by attaching students to them and supporting their growth and progress and meeting their needs rather than sending them away and creating that cycle of despair and disengagement. Will, back to you.
No, thank you, Dr. Darling-Hammond, for that great plethora of information. As you stated, exclusionary practices does not help to build the community. And so when you were talking, I was writing notes and I said, even as an adult, when I'm excluded, I feel like I'm not a part of the community. And I'm not sure if you've ever experienced that, but if as an adult I feel that way, I'm like, I bet our students feel the same way.
Indeed.
So yeah, no, thank you for your thoughts and thank you for being here to really underscore the importance of this topic. And as you and our superintendent are moving forward and working together, we definitely look at the collaboration and how we're going to improve outcomes for California's children. So thank you again. All right, so as we go to the next slide, please. I want to first off introduce our Deputy Superintendent, Nancy Portillo of the Student Achievement Branch. She's not going to speak. However, I just wanted to ensure that you all know that the Student Achievement and Support Division is under the Student Achievement Branch, and Deputy Nancy Portillo is our leader in that area. She has been with us for several short months. However, she has really made an impact. So we appreciate her and her work with the Student Achievement Branch and the Student Achievement and Support Division. I also want to introduce myself. I was waiting on that as we really underscored and set the tone of this. My name is William McGee. I'm the director of the Student Achievement and Support Division. And the Student Achievement and the Support Division is very visible throughout California in our schools. Our office supports LEAs with the LCAP, with CSI, with Title I monitoring and policy and support, as well as we support with children who are foster youth, who may be unhoused or homeless, and our Native American children. We also provide support to the rural schools. And so the Student Achievement and Support Division is very integral in the work that we do. And we're very excited about supporting this topic as well. Next slide, please. And now we will pivot to our panel discussion. We have a great panel here with us today, and we have questions that we'll ask them as well as they want to share information with us. And we'll also attempt to take questions from the chat and ask our panelists to answer those. So the question and answer function is available for you all to put questions in there and comments, as well as we'll be looking forward to getting feedback from you all as we're doing more webinars in this series to really support you all in the field. So without further ado, if we can go to the next slide, I would like to begin to introduce our panelists and framing our discussion. We know, as Dr. Darling Hammond mentioned, that children are being excluded from school. And there are some disproportionate factors that are happening that are really lending itself to children of color, in particular our Black children being excluded. There's also practices happening in certain areas where children are being excluded from school without proper notification, such as being on an official suspension, or children are being transferred from school to school. And so what we wanted to do was provide best practices, resources to support LEAs to really eradicate those type of practices. And so our framing of our discussion today will be rooted in these questions, as well as questions that you all have sent us ahead of time. Next slide, please. So our first panelist is Darren Brawley, who is currently in his 11th year as the superintendent for Compton Unified School District. Under his leadership, Compton Unified has benefited from a tremendous turnaround and elevation in student outcomes, facilities, and opportunities. Under his tenure, the district has increasingly eliminated the opportunity gap for students in the area of technology by focusing on STEAM initiatives with partners such as Digital Promise, Apple, Verizon, Boeing, Microsoft, and Google. Our next panelist is Chris Chapman, who is the CEO of Kingmakers of Oakland, also known as KU. He founded KU and served as the first executive director of the African American Male Achievement for the Oakland Unified School District and was named as a leader to learn from by Education Week magazine. Chris was selected as a campaign for Black Male Achievement Social Innovation Accelerator because he is committed to improving life outcomes for all youth and especially African American males. Next slide, please. Paul Gothold was appointed as San Diego County Superintendent of Schools in 2017 after serving as superintendent of the Linwood Unified School District, where during his tenure, the district demonstrated the highest academic growth for 2 years in the state of California as measured by California Standards test scores. In the 7 years he led Linwood, graduation rates went from 58% to almost 90%, with all historically underserved subgroups outperforming state averages in every academic marker. And from these introductions, you guys can see why we've gotten this panel. And last but not least, Ingrid Roberson is the Assistant Director of Research Learning, leading the I3 Data Research Learning Network for districts and schools. The Data Research Learning Network is a facilitated statewide research learning network focused on transforming data and assessment practices through an innovative three-pronged approach. 1 is deeper learning instruction, 2 is data review, which is innovation, and 3 is data dashboard impact. So with no further ado, we would like to welcome our panelists. We'll stop sharing our screen so that our panelists can be seen, as well as I also want to pivot back to our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, who was able to join us. Welcome, Superintendent Thurmond. We were just introducing the panel, and we told the field that you were supporting us by testifying in front of the legislature and that you would be here. So we would love for you to help us as our panel gets started to frame this conversation We were able to hear words from Dr. Darling Hammond. She really lit the crew up with her research. So if you want to please support us with framing this discussion, we would love that. And then we'll get into our panel discussion.
Thank you, Director McGee. And thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation. And very sorry to miss Dr. Darling Hammond's presentation. I believe, in fact, that she pushed us to the right direction. I know that she's done incredible research in this area and many areas in education. And we're hoping that we can get some more money in the state legislative budget to support these important programs. Thank you, Dr. Brawley, for your great work, and Dr. Roberson, Brother Chris Chapman. We thank all of you, and to Superintendent Gothald, thank you all for sharing your perspective. Thank you, Director McGee, to you and your team for pulling us together for this important conversation. You know what? I don't want to belabor the panel. I just like to provide just some good news. We appreciate everyone being focused on this topic. We know that students will learn better when they're not pushed out of class or pushed out of school. And there are ways to prevent that from happening, not the least of which is the nearly $100 million that our office has provided in the Learning Communities for School Success Program grants. That's restorative justice and programs to reduce chronic absenteeism. We have another round of grants coming out on March the 31st. That's another $28 million in grants. I know that many of you will talk about community schools. You know, community schools is more than just wraparound supports, which are important, but also has the ability to transform our schools and to help us educate and not incarcerate our kids. You know, we have $4 billion for community schools in the state, and already we've allocated more than $650 million for planning grants and implementation grants, and yet another round of grants will be going out for community schools soon. You know, the department is working on putting out some mini grants to help schools as they think about ways to engage students more directly. And so we'll be putting out some mini grants to help create a longer school year and STEAM academies, in particular for students who may have been chronically absent. We're going to be putting out a grant to use the Freedom School Literacy Intervention Program. This is an Afrocentric, evidence-based literacy program that helps students improve their school, their reading by as much as 2 grades, sometimes in as little as 6 weeks. Incredible work, and it can be used to help all students. And so we want to continue to do this. We put out grants to train educators and administrators around challenging bias, implicit bias grants. And we are working hard on teacher recruitment and classified staff recruitment and diversifying the workforce. We have grants of $20,000 for anyone who wants to become a teacher or become a mental health clinician. And so we're excited. We hope to hear from you at Teach and CA, at cde.ca.gov. And I throw that all out there to say all these programs connect with all the things that we're doing that we think can help to end disproportionality. We have a transitional kindergarten, universal meals, you know, actually it's universal preschool across all categories, reading coaches and specialist grants. We have all these great programs, and when we integrate them together, we keep students in school. We can reduce disproportionate discipline. We can help our students achieve and do great things. And so thank you for allowing me to provide you a greeting and share the good news about some of our great programs. I'm passing it back to you, Director McGee, to help our panel get underway.
No, perfect. Thank you, Superintendent Thurman, and we appreciate those words. And the words that you mentioned echo the words that Dr. Darling Hammond mentioned as well, talking about keeping children in school, really combating and eradicating the exclusion. And then you also mentioned Freedom Schools. I was able to experience Freedom Schools in my former role as a director for 2 school years. And we looked at the data and we saw the growth that our Black children who participated in Freedom Schools experienced academically, as well as social and emotionally. And there were a lot of trends and things that we were also able to replicate and send to our teachers for professional development. So we're very looking forward to our panelist discussion because we know they have more insights. And so we know that you'll stick around for a moment as well. But thank you for framing that discussion for us. And now let's get our panelists back on screen so we can really move the conversation forward. So as we continue to this discussion, and again, we have over 370 people tuned in right now during the middle of the day. So to me, that shows the importance of this topic panel. And so I know that you guys are phenomenal and you guys are going to do an off the hook job to really impart some strategies. And we're also going to try and take some of the question and answers from the chat because people are clamoring, asking about resources and things of that nature. However, before we get there, why don't we start off with telling the community what your role is in the educational system, or how does your work support the educational system? So why don't we start off with you, Ingrid? Will you come off mute and tell us about your role and how it supports the educational system?
Thank you, Will, for that question, and really appreciate being here. This is incredibly important in the lives of students. So I'm with the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. That is a state agency, and we do direct work both with counties as well as districts, and really supporting continuous improvement, especially around those California School Dashboard indicators. I specifically lead the Data Research Learning Network that actually is working with districts and counties across the state, trying to improve data practices. And that does include looking at practices around the suspension indicator. And so making sure you have the system around that, the knowledge, the practices, and the leadership, right? Really, you can have the data, but you need to do two other things. I call it the 3 Ds. You need to create the space for discussion. And you need to create the actual decision-making, actually having decisions from that data. So data, discussions, and making decisions. And that is the work that we do, and really being able to bring best practices that we're seeing in this area as we're in all these different contexts. I'll stop there because I know we're doing introductions.
No, thank you for that. And I heard you say the 3 Ds, data, discussion, and decision. And so I definitely want us to unpack that a little bit more. Let's pivot to Chris, and then we'll pivot to Paul. So Chris, same question. What is your role in the educational system, and how does your work impact the educational systems in your community?
Thank you, Brother Will, and greetings, distinguished panel and guests. My name is Chris Chapman, founder and CEO of Kingmakers of Oakland. We center Black boys while serve all students. We work with districts across the country and as well as county agencies to identify a multiracial, intergenerational, cross-functional team that creates a set of strategies along 6 drivers that address what we call the toxic ecosystem that really fuels and feeds the school to prison pipeline. We have a way of, through our liberatory design process, of facilitating a process of centering our kings, developing these strategies that not only accelerate academic performance for Black boys, but improves educational outcomes for all. Look forward to participating further in discussion, and I'll pass it to our next colleague.
Thank you for that, Chris. And definitely, we're going to tag into that toxic ecosystem, right? Because I think sometimes we think that this is a child problem. And so how do we break that down, and what do we really look at? So please, let's go to Paul, and then let's follow up with Darren. Again, Paul, what's your role in education? How are you supporting the education system?
Yeah, afternoon, Paul Gothel, proud superintendent, San Diego County Office of Ed. Thank you, Will, and for the leadership of our state board president, State Sup, and everyone on the line. Honor and privilege to be here. And I also want to just say Happy Women's History Month and acknowledge that the path for our women has not been the same as for men, and particularly our women of color. And so we're celebrating you this month. And I want to elevate that in that short 2 seconds point of privilege. Apologize for that. I have served in every level in public education. Right now in this current role, I have the honor and privilege of serving the most beautiful kids in this county, and those are the ones who have been pushed out of the system. So our adjudicated kids, our kids in our community schools, homeless, foster, we get to do that. And I say we get to because we watch the transformation right before our eyes. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I ironically started my career as a teacher in Los Angeles in the adjudicated system, taught probation expelled kids, and loved them, cared about them. I didn't treat them any differently than my mom, who raised 4 kids on her own. And that was, I was going to prepare you for everything, because you can do anything. And I've taken that philosophy everywhere I've gone, even as a director, as an assistant principal, as a principal, superintendent of a mid-size district. And now we get to support 42 districts, 160 charter schools. And then we have 26 schools ourselves with the population that I mentioned before. And so would like to share a little bit of insight from all of those experiences if time permits.
No, absolutely. And time will permit, because even though this is a formal conversation, we want to make it informal with the discussion and allowing you all to present best practices. I had the privilege of traveling to Stanislaus County Office of Education, where they held a foster youth conference, and they had adults there. And we had a very, very powerful panel from the youth telling us what they needed in school. So we definitely will welcome your thoughts and comments, as there's some questions already in the Q&A about how do we support that population of children. Last, please, Darren, if you don't mind, come off mute. Please talk to us about your educational system, your role, and how you're supporting children.
Yes, I'm a superintendent in Compton Unified School District. This is my 11th year as superintendent there. And the primary role in terms of how this all fits in, for me anyway, is really creating systems that allow us to eliminate those opportunity gaps for the students that we serve. Compton serves predominantly Black and Brown children, and our goal all along has been to create systems and to diminish practices that have led students to into the prison pipeline. We've done that predominantly by a lot of different things. One of the major things we've accomplished is eliminating the push-out practices that existed within our organization at the high school level related to alternative education. And I will be able to talk about some of those things as we get further into the discussion. We have quite a few restorative practices that are in place, and we've accomplished a lot, similar to what you heard about Paul Goethals. 58% graduation rate when I first started. We're at 90% now. And we've put a lot of focus in the reduction of suspensions and expulsions over that time period, so that students could take a more active part in the education and not be excluded in the process.
Great. Thank you for your words. And I know we definitely would love to unpack what you were able to do and your team in regard to reducing the suspension and expulsions. And as I mentioned, my team from the Student Achievement and Support Division really support with a lot of this work, and really looking at how we can make it more tangible, how we can continue those best practices. And so one of the things that's great about this panel is that we have a representative from the county office level, from the district level, and then we also have community-based organizations represented. And so, Paul, if we can go back to you, you did mention some systems at your county office level. Will you talk to us and maybe go into a little more detail? How are you supporting the LEAs in your county with keeping children in school? And then, as well as what you mentioned, right, you're working with some of our most vulnerable population of children, our foster youth children, children who are unhoused. So what are you doing? How are you and your team supporting those children? And how are you seeing that success manifest?
Yeah, I think if I may, Will, I just want to share a quick personal data fact, and that is that I've never expelled a kid in 30 years of public ed.
Whoa.
Ever.
Whoa.
And that's a philosophy. I think that comes a lot from my experience starting as a teacher and looking at the damage that was done to our young people coming to the schools where I had the honor and privilege to teach. The first few days, sometimes 2 weeks, was just breaking down all of the negativity our kids have heard in the way that they had been treated, and lifting them up and making sure that they started to build some self-efficacy and confidence. The damage it does is almost irreparable. And I heard, so when we talk about restorative practices, when we talk about not expelling, I'm not talking about free of consequence, free of alternative means of addressing the child. But for us, and what I've been doing here at the county with a remarkable team is, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that this system wasn't designed to support all kids in the first place. We should not be surprised by some of the data points that we see. And if we can do one of two things, we can work differently in support of all kids, or we can preserve status quo and come back to school in September and do things away. And there's been this underlying gravitational pull to this almost philosophy that some kids will and some kids won't. And part of our job as leaders in this county is to really exude, no way, kids are not going to fail. They all come in with the same conditions by birth, and the conditions and the system has created this. So we need to work against this tension. It's not to displace blame. It's not to point fingers. It's about understanding that any kid can do anything. And we get to, if Sean Ginwright would say, from lens to mirror, what are we doing differently in order to provide the supports that our kids need? And so when you talk about discipline, there are layers beneath that extend far beyond a simple act or something a kid did. Connection to the school, connection to those. Right now, today, before the pandemic, 62% of our children said they felt like they belong, as evidenced by the Healthy Kids Survey. Now, if that were desegregated by race, can you imagine what that would look like? So it's the culture we create in our school, high expectations and rigor, a guaranteed premium education for every child where they see themselves valued and honored. Dr. Joe Johnson just published a book, When Black Kids Excel. He's a former professor at San Diego, good friend and chair of our African American advisory. And one of the elements of that book where we see our Black children, they're not being suspended or expelled. They're succeeding above state averages. But when they talk about the adults on campus, they see their teachers, they see their administrators as champions for them. The true believers, superheroes, that's how they talk about their teachers. That's how they talk about their administrators. That's what they talk about the school culture. So just philosophically, I think acknowledging that there's been a lot of harm to our kids, that it's also generational. This didn't happen overnight. And then building from there. So one of the things that we've done is we have a restorative practices team that supports all 42 districts. In fact, we do not have the horsepower to support now the need out in the field. We've contracted with the NCRC, the National Conflict Resolution Center. We provide training and support on the ground for student services directors, for teachers, for assistant principals of discipline, to do what Dr. Darlene Hammond had mentioned earlier. We've seen a 500% reduction in suspension for our Black and brown kids in our schools and in place, because really what we're fundamentally more interested in are the conditions that led up to the act. What the system has had a tendency to do is punish the symptom. They go right to punishment. And by the way, the definition of discipline, I think, is to change behavior. It has nothing to do with punishment. So
Right.
when we talk about connecting with our kids on a different level, when we talk about being in relationship differently as partners with our families, with our kids, it is about the voice. This document here was our groups of community, 3 years of elevating the voice, capturing it, and distinct strategies to pull into their LCAP. It's a guide. It's basically lifting up the voice of our children. Because what voice have they had other than arbitrary, you can't come to school here anymore?
Yeah.
And we can't give up on any child. I mean, we just can't. So in our work with restorative practices, we've seen a remarkable reduction in suspensions. We've cut our expulsions in half from over 300 about 6 years ago. We're at to 120, which is a long way to go, but we are seeing process. And I do want to say, because we, again, support the kids in our juvenile justice system, and I'll just stop talking after that for a little bit. The system hasn't been fair, and some of the data we brought together, the juvenile courts, the district attorney, probation, our school officials, and we just put the data in front and said, help us understand this. If white kids were busted for substance abuse, they got referred to treatment. If the black or brown kid, they got locked up. That's just fact. It's there. It's right there. And so with the leadership of the district attorney and our probation and working with folks from our office, developed achievement centers around this county for those less egregious offenses. What they did was report to the achievement center after school from 3 to 8, fed them dinner, but whatever the needs of the kids were, whatever the needs, if it was gang diversion, if it was substance abuse, if it was counseling, all of those services were there in wraparound supports to insulate and protect the child in lieu of incarceration. And the vast majority of the kids never came back.
Mm.
And so it was a model that, 6 years ago, we had almost 700 kids incarcerated. We're down to about 110 in this county. But it's just an example of even the policy. Our money, our ADA, is based on the expulsion of kids and the incarceration of kids. It's counterintuitive. I'm spending money on a restorative practices team to prevent the incarceration of kids. And the last I lied to you was one other thing I want to talk, because I think it's significant. With special ed, our South Bay SELPA, which is our districts that are closest to the border, developed through MTSS an early indicator system. They had, in 2016, had 16 over-identified disproportionate areas of concern, whether that was too many black and brown kids identified as special ed, chronic absenteeism, suspension, whatever the case. That is now 0 for this group of districts. And this data system provides those early indicators that gives our staff the ability to go in, provide PBIS supports for the kid, for the family. It is getting in front of it. And so I do think that, and I know that work's been scaled or statewide and what they've developed down there along with our other SELPAs. But I have been talking a long time, so I'm gonna stop.
No, and Paul, we appreciate it too, because again, this is authentic conversation, and you have my pen on fire. Like, I'm taking notes and I say, oh my goodness, I can't keep up, but I'm happy this is recorded. You mentioned several things, and if you don't mind, Paul, if you would type the name of the document or the book you showed in the chat so one of our SASD members can put that out, that would be great, because that was a question. But you said, don't punish the symptom, right? And you're talking about not having to expel children for 30 years. And then also the early indicator system, that's something that we're going to get into. And I'll tell you, Paul, while you were talking, our panelists was shaking their head like, yep, we agree. So why don't we pivot to Ingrid? Maybe Ingrid wants to contribute for a few minutes on this. And Paul, Chris was also agreeing with a lot of the stuff you said. He may want to even comment. But Ingrid, will you talk to us a little bit about this? Paul mentioned a lot, coming from that county office perspective, right? And you're part of the community-based organization. So what do you think? How are you supporting LEAs? And Paul threw a lot out there, but please jump in there, Ingrid.
All right, thank you for that, Will. And Paul, you had my head shaking a lot. So again, from the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, we're a state agency that works with counties and districts doing direct technical assistance. We have our research practice partnerships. And like I said, I'm leading the DRLN, which is the Data Research Learning Network. So around the suspension indicator, Paul mentioned some things around really looking at our systems. We have created a system that has led to these outcomes, and especially the disproportionality for specific student groups, especially when we're looking at African-American males, Latinos. And so a lot of what the DRLN does in working with districts and counties is talking about leveraging the data systems that you have so that you've got the data, you're having a discussion, and you're making decisions with students in mind, right? That we want to improve the outcomes there. So one, in terms of having the data, so as each of you back at your schools and your districts and your counties, there is a fair amount of data around here. So making sure you're leveraging whatever in your CalPads. There is a suspension report there, your student information system. In fact, DataQuest, which is hosted by CDE, gives you 10 years worth of suspension data. So that's a really great way to see what's been happening over the last decade. That is simply not just the pandemic that explains everything, that you really can look at the last decade of data. Also, if you look at EdData, it will look at 5 years worth of data and does some really nice visualizations. So you don't need to build the perfect data system. There's actually a fair amount that's free to you. Another thing I would say about the Data Quest, it actually allows you to compare to other districts in your county. So, you know, into that particular context. So the data is there. Where I think a lot of growth needs to happen is around creating the space for discussions. It's the practice, right? And so in working with districts that were identified for additional support around the suspension indicator, it was actually creating the space and having leadership create space at the highest levels to look at that suspension data. And the suspension rate only starts the conversation. You really need to get into sort of the stories of what's happening around suspension. So one practice that I definitely promote, and we saw in quite a few districts, is actually doing what's called call a friend. So typically the administrator is the one that authorizes the suspension at the school site. And so a practice that was being put in place was to have the administrator call the central office administrator, so there could be a conversation at that point of that decision. And what we found in districts that took that approach is that they were really learning what was happening that was leading to that decision. And in fact, that practice can interrupt, quite frankly, right before a student gets suspended. And what we were hearing from districts is that, you know, a lot of times it is the adult reacting and not responding. And that is an emotional difference. So, you know, put the lens towards us where we have the locus of control. You know, it's not always about the student and the student behavior. There's so much more. Someone referenced the layers. Will, actually, I think you were talking about the complex layers around suspension. And so that practice of actually, you know, taking a time frame and having your administrators call you, if you're the central office in particular, or whether it's site administrator to site administrator, creating that pause as to what's happening, what's the emotions going on, what's the decision going on as to why you're about to suspend, really gives a lot of rich qualitative data and really helps you begin to understand what's happening in that moment and how much of the adult reaction is contributing, quite frankly, to the suspension rate. And then the other thing that I would say is, you know, making those decisions, right, at that leadership level. And so doing quite frankly, a policy review as to how you're creating a system that disadvantages particular student groups. An example I would give there is some districts had Saturday school and students were missing Saturday school because transportation, you know, parents working on the weekend. And so that was contributing, and all of a sudden it was causing even more sort of red flags around the behavior, but the system's creating those red flags without designing really with what does their students need. And so having that leadership and to make those decisions where you shift policy that's really in the best interest of students and making those bold actions, you know, it just doesn't have to be the system that we've always had. So, you know, I would leave you with those couple of practices to really try to interrupt this and put the lens on ourselves and what we've designed.
No, and thank you for that. And I believe that that brings up some good stuff. You talk about policy shifts, because I've been a principal and assistant principal having to implement and carry out that policy, right? And so I contributed to the disproportionate suspensions of our Black and Latino children. And so I remember being a middle school principal, guys, and I really challenged my team because we had these practices and we said, what can we do differently? So I remember my assistant principal, Athena Valdez, and a school psychologist, LaShante Smith, came up with a rubric to really support us when children got into a physical altercation. What was our response as adults? Was it an immediate suspension, or were we able to do restorative practices? And so I want to pivot to Darren and Chris. We're coming, so Chris, get ready because we need some knowledge from you too. But Darren, will you allow us to pivot to you? And I want to ask you a question that's combined. So one of the questions questions that we have from a participant in the audience talks about staffing, time, resources. And that was something I struggled with as a principal and a director. And I was like, we're overworked, we're overwhelmed, we're underfunded. Will you talk to us about how you combated that? And as Ingrid mentioned, right, like calling a friend, creating wraparound spaces. I know I'm asking Darren a loaded question, right? But what are practices that you implemented to reduce suspensions of Black and Latino and Native American children? And then how did you support your staff with like those time and resources? Will you talk a little bit about that from a district perspective?
Sure. So before I get into that, when I came to Compton almost 11 years ago now, the governing board had already taken a staunch focus on reducing that school to prison pipeline. And that carried out through everything that we've implemented. So in Compton, we've addressed disproportionate discipline by really continuing to nurture the whole child. We use our LCAP funding to build robust academic support systems, to provide student interventions and a comprehensive school mental health system. These interventions are assessed by using our multi-tiered system of support at each school site. Under the direction of the governing board, we began this turnaround process, if you will, related to not just academics, but also wellness initiatives to address the social emotional needs of our students within Compton. We wanted to ensure that each student, regardless of their current circumstances or existing circumstances, had the resiliency necessary to reach their full academic potential. We built trauma-informed school systems with a safe and respectful school environment that enabled the students to build caring relationships with adults and peers, to self-regulate their emotions and behaviors and succeed academically. Our approach at this point in time has developed 22 wellness centers within our school district. So when you talk about, what are some of the resources, the wellness centers are one of those such resources, and those will continue to expand within the district. Each wellness center has 3 confidential treatment rooms where students can receive group and individual therapeutic services. So when you say, how have we accomplished all this? First and foremost, through MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support, ongoing cohorts and implementation of PBIS that's been in place since I arrived in the district, and we continue to fund new cohorts annually through training at the county level. And that is implemented school-wide at each of our schools with technical assistance from the district office, as well as LACO, Los Angeles County Office of Education. We focus on social skills fluency with our students. SEL, we touched briefly upon, but pertaining to SEL within Compton Unified School District, we have a program in place at our K-8 schools, which is known as Second Step. And at the high school level, we've implemented Move This World. But to further that, we also have Panorama in place, which is a survey system to identify issues that our students are being impacted with pertaining to SEL. And we provide that survey 3 times a year. In addition to that, we have services that are provided through Care Solace, which farms out the mental health services to various agencies that can provide the services based upon the student's need. I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is the connection that we have with Centinela Youth Services to provide or to address restorative practices. We work with them to really eliminate the infractions that students would typically get based upon things that they've done by participating in restorative practices through Centinela Youth Services. We also have restorative circles that are in place within our school system. Our counselor ratio is 250-1 at the high school. So when you're talking about, providing services to students, at the high school level. 250-to-1 counselor ratio is unheard of. And at the high school, I mean, middle school, our ratio is 300-to-1. We focus on a lot of restorative practice training, formal training that is provided to our staff and the restorative circles that are actually implemented within the school system. We have a very good partnership with various agencies throughout the community. St. John's Well Child Center, in terms of what they provide for mental health services as well as medical services. You heard me mention Centinela Youth Services already. You also heard me mention Care Solis. Hazel Health also provides mental health services to our students within the organization. And we have a Office of Homeless and Foster Youth that takes keen interest in our foster youth and our homeless students. And we also have a very robust parental support system within the district, consisting of community relations specialists that interact with our families to address the needs that students have. About 2 years ago, we implemented our Black Student Achievement Division to provide ongoing support and mentoring and opportunities for Black students within Compton Unified School District. And our English Language Learner Division pretty much does similar things with the EL students that we serve within the organization to ensure that we are taking care of their needs. And, you know, I think that oftentimes is something that is missed by a lot. You know, we have a focus on transitioning our English language learners prior to them getting to high school so that they can participate fully within the curriculum and have the opportunities to get admitted into CSUs and UC systems. And if they don't reclassify prior to high school, that becomes very difficult in terms of the number of A through G courses that that population has to take. We also have a similar focus even in our preschool division. And so, you know, to sum it all up, multi-tiered systems of support, positive behavior intervention and supports, focus on social and emotional learning, community schools I didn't talk about, but we have community schools within our organization as well. And we focus a lot on trauma-informed practices within our classroom, suicide prevention as well, restorative classroom, restorative circles, restorative justice, and just making sure that we bring in the necessary partners to serve the mental health needs of our students.
No, thank you for that. And that was very comprehensive. I mean, to me, the discussion has been very comprehensive. There's been a lot of tangible examples. You all have mentioned restorative practices, and King Chapman, we're going to pivot to you as well. I have a question that I want to ask you. The panelists have been mentioning restorative, and again, I talk about a middle school I was a principal of, one of the most challenging middle schools in our district, but the most beautiful. Children really wanted to learn. And again, one of my assistant principals brought my idea to fruition. It was modeled after, what was it, the McCullough Youth Court in Oakland, where we actually had a peer restorative practices setup. And it was so funny, guys, because we're beating our heads, you know, trying to get children to be on time to class. We're giving them consequences. I think Ingrid mentioned Saturday school. It wasn't changing the behavior until we got this peer mediation group together, and we started sending children who were tardy to this peer mediation group. And once they started levying consequences and discussions, you guys, I had children run into class before I could even say, hurry up, get your little tail to class. They were running because it was implemented by the children themselves. So Chris, please talk to us, because in spaces I've been in, we talk about this as being a child problem. We talk about this as being a Black problem. Paul gave some great knowledge where he said, you know, the system wasn't set up to educate children of color, in particular Black children. I've had to work with educators. There's somebody who said, are we going to talk about how to engage the teachers union? I think teachers are on board with this, and we know that we have to get their buy-in. So talk to us about where we say that this is a child problem, or Black children don't want to learn, or Black families don't care because they don't come to school. My team, my monitoring team says that our Black families are engaged and they want to learn. So Chris, and let me stop talking because I'm getting very emotional. And the superintendent said he wanted this to be a real conversation. So you guys, please continue with this realness. But what do we say, Chris? How do you support when you deal with us that say, hey, the child doesn't want to learn, the family doesn't care about education? What is your research? What has that shown?
I'll go back to, and first of all, thank you, Brother Will. And I mean, I think part of going last, y'all, there's so much that each person shared that I wanted to respond to. I kind of had my canned approach of what I wanted to say, but now I'm just coming off the head and the heart, given this really has been my life legacy work. Any decision that impacts the needs of Black children need to be at the decision-making table. We are trying to design and solve for solutions of those furthest from opportunity, and we have it all wrong. My brother, Dr. Paul Gotthold, talked about we have to redesign the system, the structure, the culture, and the condition. It was designed to do what it's exactly doing. We don't have a child problem. We have an adult problem that continues to perpetuate this antiquated system that is creating these disparate outcomes. Be it if you're using MTSS or PBIS or RJ or SEL or an AccuSpeak, all of these different acronyms, if you don't talk with love and grace around race and culture, it doesn't matter what you do. You will continue to perpetuate disproportionate referral suspension rates, in particular for Black, Brown, Indigenous kings and queens, as well as referral to special ed with emotional disturbance classification. So it's really about the mental models of how we put forward in this professional development ether. And I'm gonna quote my brother again, Brother Paul, of the work of the mirror and the window work. We cannot transform these systems. They outlive all amazing individuals unless we're going through the process of transforming ourselves, while then we are looking at redesigning the system, the structure, the condition, and culture, but not in isolation of those young people furthest from opportunity. They are beautiful, brilliant, and all possess innate greatness. As he said when they were born, all children were of that condition, but then they're sent to school where the ecology, and if we can go to the slide of my toxic ecosystem slide, this will just add some color to what it is I'm gonna say around when a flower doesn't bloom. Next slide, please. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So this theoretical framework that we use from John Powell that's targeted universalism and centering those furthest from opportunity, while serving all, our approach is we must heal the fish, our kings and queens, while we treat this toxic ecosystem. What the system does, in particular for Black, Brown, Indigenous kings and queens, Asian Pacific Islander kings and queens, as well as our extraordinary young people that embody learning difference. We realize that the culture and the condition is all wrong. Right? Our engagement strategy, the stories of which we tell, don't elevate or cultivate and I'm sorry, my computer is now tweaking. Hopefully folks can still see me.
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see the slide still, Chris.
Yeah, so just acknowledging the culture and the condition is toxic. The harsh discipline policies is nothing new. Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond has showed that we have been disproportionately suspending Black children since 1973. Ron Edmonds put a report out in the 1960s that said, it's not a matter of not knowing what to do. We have all the data and the know-how. Really, this is a matter of will, right? Where we can build the will around how collectively we can co-design to create the system, structure, culture, and condition where each and every child can see themselves in the content, in the curriculum, where there's a sense of belonging, it creates and perpetuates self-efficacy, there's cultural identity, and at the end goal, there's collective responsibility. Those are the leading indicators that we must be assessing, not the lagging indicators that we continue to perpetuate, that privileges the privileged in these school systems and further disadvantages those students who don't see themselves in the context. The biased curriculum and negative framing, we continue to let Tell Our Vision tell our vision. Public school systems in this country do two things well around communication. And Sister Ingrid Robertson talked about, they react. They do reactionary communication as opposed to asset-based communication and crisis communication. They do that well. But communicating to the audacious vision where all children can see themselves in the brevity and the beauty of what it is that we're trying to do from the classroom to the boardroom perpetuates the school to prison pipeline. And the last piece, which kind of continues the condition piece, is around the discrimination, criminalization of the negative media portrayal. So the piece that I haven't heard just yet is the stories, right? If you're going to build will, where everyone can see the collective humanity, from the students to the classified staff, to the teachers, to the central office, to the senior leaders, to the school board, but from nested in a community school framework, we have to lead with story. This work is not easy. And if you're doing it right, there's going to be tension, right? But when we do RJ and SEL, and it's not nested in a cultural lens, we could be continuing to perpetuate the very same things we're trying to differentiate and address. And so you got to deal with race. You got to deal with culture with grace. Let's go to the next slides, please, and I'll get into just some of the resolutions. Y'all, if you want to help our kings and queens take their crowns out their pocket and rock it in math, science, language, arts, social studies, they gotta see themselves, their cultural prosperity in math, in science, in social studies, in English, in all of the elective classes. Culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy is paramount. It cannot just be a 10th grade ethnic studies course, which is necessary yet insufficient. Why are kings and queens agitated or maybe not engaged? A lot of times it's because they don't see themselves in the content. Black male teachers, 70% of our teaching force, and all love to the 70% of white women that are teaching, but many times the explicit and implicit bias that they carry because they don't have the experience, the authentic understanding of who and whose we are, so they perpetuate the out-of-class referral, the out-of-class suspension piece. And so we have to be innovative on how we're recruiting, training, and retaining Black male teachers in particular, but teachers of color, and recruiting them with retention in mind, but making sure they're not perpetuating the antiquated pedagogical practices that we continue to fully bake in our 4-year credentialing classes. Moving forward, if you want to solve for and figure out how you engage and address this disproportionate suspension referral rate, is you have to engage the kings. Listen, every time you assess a child, they should be assessing you. If you want to design something in service of those furthest from opportunity, they should be the co-designers, as well as their families, as well as the community partners, as well as the community that you hope to work with to solve for. So activating youth voice is imperative. Youth leadership, giving kings role in the classroom, throughout to the boardroom, in school, out of school. And Brother Will, you hit that, right? You talked about when kings are holding kings accountable, they'll go further faster because that peer pressure works, right? But we have to activate that agency, and there's so few limited opportunities, in particular for Black boys, to take their crown out their pocket and lead in the classroom, in the school, in the district. We have to accelerate that. And it cannot just be GPA requirements. It cannot be standardized test requirements. As I've had the opportunity to travel across this country with kings, some of the most amazing, extraordinary young people were those kings below a 2.0. Right? How we manifest and demonstrate our beauty and brilliance may not always come in the standardized test. And we have to take that limiting assessment and open that up to increase leadership opportunities. If we're really going to do this work of healing, of accelerating academic and life performance for Black boys, we have to move in this full service community framework. It's a blessing to hear Dr. Tony Thurmond fund and invest in community schools, but we're only as good as we're in right relationship with the Black community, with the African community, with the Pan-African community. And a lot of times, because we've had traumatic experiences when we were children in these same schools, we may carry that forward when you all engage us. So how do you build alliances and create authentic opportunities where the Black community, the Pan-African community is working in concert in the classroom to the boardroom? Talked about narrative change. I think we can get much more sophisticated. We had to do that in particular when the pandemic hit, around social media, around music, around film. Allowing young people to tell their story is another way where if teachers and adults are listening, they can take that context and then calibrate that to the content, to the differentiated instruction, and make more meaning-making activities in the class. And what fully binds all of this goodness is policy. And our approach to policy is through youth participatory action research. That really, if you want to change authentic and move authentic policy, you can't do that. And we tell our kings, you're either on the menu or you're at the decision-making table. So if you want to address the system and structure, those young people furthest from opportunity have to be the co-designers and the facilitators and leaders of policy change, from the classroom to the school to the boardroom. I'll close from there, just given I said a lot, and love to have the open it back up for conversation as well. Thank you, Brother William.
No, and absolutely. And I appreciate what you said, like that co-designing. So when the vice principal, Andrew Strawbridge, was able to get that peer mediation together, the children co-designed that. And not only did we see more children on time to class, we saw less behavior issues in class. And some of our teaching staff recognized that, right? And they realized that the children will respond if we put it out there for them. I mean, you mentioned a lot, and I think everything that you guys have talked about has really been woven into each other's comments. And so, I mean, we have a lot of things where, and the superintendent, he said, Will, why is the webinar only an hour? He said, we need to expand this. And I said, hey, my bad, I thought it was only an hour. And then on top of that, you guys, we're gonna do a series, because I even see an hour and a half is not enough time, because the knowledge that you guys are kicking, you're talking about things that my colleague Lisa Borrego does in the whole child division. You're talking about students with disabilities that Heather Calamise does. Just on this panel I was on the other day talking about pre-kindergarten through third grade, they were talking about strategies. And so you guys are hitting this point. So we have like about, let's say about 12 minutes left, because we also want to ensure that we lament the resources you all mentioned and others. But some of the questions in the Q&A, you guys, we definitely will be talking about our students with disabilities and how they're being disproportionately affected. I believe I heard Paul mention something about how they were able to do the early identification. Darren also spoke about that. But will you guys also touch on, and please come off of mute and maybe about 47 seconds, however you guys want to do it. But there's a participant asking about what advice would you have for a school system that pre-pandemic wasn't implementing social emotional learning? We have administrator fatigue, teacher fatigue, people believe in it, but how do we cultivate them to really implement that? How do we move the work forward? Anybody want to jump off, and multiple people, 47 seconds or whatnot? Who wants to tackle that one first? I see Paul and then Darren.
Yeah, I think what Chris said earlier is first of all, just what an honor and privilege to learn from my colleagues on the line today. What Chris said is really important. You know, the social emotional learning, this is a catch-all for so much that we have identified that it actually can do some damage if not provided in the right context, with absent of culture, absent of student voice. Because some of these platforms, quite frankly, are really looking at our children from a deficit perspective. It starts there. And by this is part of the problem with education. And what Chris was talking about co-constructing, you know, we in our blueprint that I shared in the chat, I think it's in the chat, we have a section dedicated to socially conscious leadership. That means we have to be in relationship differently with our communities. That means we need to learn from our communities. That means we need to listen, lift up the assets. There's so much beauty and culture in every single community. lift that up, bring that into the school, and talk through and identify what our communities need. That is so critical. You know, people, when we were working in Linwood, people said, wow, you're hiring social workers and you built a health center. What's wrong with you? This was 2012. They said, you're supposed to teach our kids. And I said, well, this is what our community wanted. This is what our kids need. Adults wanted, parents were unemployed. They wanted work opportunities. So we used our adult ed program to build an LVN certification program because the hospital had a demand for skilled labor. You just do whatever it takes to make sure our families are healthy. But again, our school systems, my friend Tony Smith would say that, have a tendency to be dehumanizing. And we're working on the wrong things sometimes, and we're spinning on that hamster wheel. That process of slowing it down and providing the necessary supports for our staff, for our teacher, are critical. I'll give you one strategy that I used that was massively helpful. We know that teachers do better when they're aligned in their thinking and the outcomes for students are calibrated so that the expectations for third graders aren't wildly different from one classroom to the next, but we never have time to do these things. I used our after-school providers. I used one substitute teacher because of shortage of subs. And we brought all the kids from every grade level out of school with our after-school providers to do 2-3 hours of enrichment, of STEM, of arts and music. And the teachers had grounded, solid time for PD, for looking at student data. And there were after-school providers in the same room working on understanding what the academic needs, what maybe supports outside. When we had 36 health agencies working with it, we didn't call it social emotional learning. We had universal screening for kids who really needed mental health. So give them what they need, but it has to also be based on science, and that includes the adults. So I think there's a variety of ways to slice this up where we're challenged with time, we're challenged with resources. That's one simple example of how you can give folks a break every 3 weeks by just giving them 2 hours in structured time to guided planning, to data, looking at children holistically and making sure that we're meeting their needs. And we're all supporting each other doing that.
And Paul, with that example, we could see how you decrease those negative numbers. Thank you for sharing that. Darren, did you want to still come off mute and say some stuff?
Yeah, I'll just say this. Prior to the pandemic, we were 2 years into piloting SEL programs within Compton. I don't see how you cannot do it. Where you put your money says a lot about an organization. There's every single school district should have a process where teachers, as well as the community and other interested parties, chime in on the LCAP prior to it being approved. And that's your opportunity to say, these are needs within our community. These are the services that our students deserve to receive, must receive. One thing the pandemic taught us is that our students have significant mental health issues. So I don't see how anyone can be a teacher within an organization, an administrator within an organization, or even a governing board within an organization that does not put money and resources into social emotional learning.
No, thank you for that. Ingrid, we see you came off too. What are you adding to what Darren said? Because that was crazy. What Darren said, that was knowledge, right?
No, all of it is knowledge. I'm really appreciating this panel, Will, that you've put together. What I would add is, the reality is we have a teacher shortage, right? And so we do need to really invest in who we have right now. And so I really think we need to get out of siloing our PDs. So we have our equity PD and we have our math PD. And so how are we braiding these practices together? Because burnout is real. And I think, as you said, Brother Chris, we do need to talk about race and culture in this work. And so how are we creating and braiding those practices in everything that we do? So if we're having a math PD, how are we bringing in and creating space for that practice? Because it is a practice to get to a place and to build the trust to have these conversations that center race and culture. And the last thing I would say is, for all of the adults that are in the system, we do need to attend to a circle of safety. You need to feel psychologically safe to really tackle a lot of what we're talking about, and the adults will need that too. So, creating that sense of safety, because that will affect trust, and we will move at the speed of trust.
No, great. Thank you for that, Ingrid. And that was a very great compliment to what Darren and Paul said. And Chris, if we could pivot to you, because I may not have done the most effective job of moderating this, because right there, you guys just gave some great closing statements. So Chris, can we pivot to you to give us maybe a closing statement as well to compliment Paul, Ingrid, and Darren's, and then we're going to pivot to resources after that.
Yeah, our children will be our fate or our future. If we're not taking care of ourselves as adults, then we don't have a bright future. So I think it takes site-based leadership to make sure that every adult on that campus is always putting that oxygen mask on themselves. That as much as we are creating the conditions, the systems and structures for healing, for love, for light, for learning within classrooms, it's reciprocal for the adults. And so if they're part of the co-designers and we've created that environment, we all win. I mean, at the end of the day, and I too was a kindergarten through 8th grade PE teacher and a high school social studies teacher and a principal. But teaching is that divine dance, right? When you see those little children doing their things because they're taking it in, right? And adults can feel that as well. I think we've got out of whack, we've got out of rhythm, and we got to get back really just to the human facet of love, of what are the necessary conditions that a community needs for each and every child to see themselves in the content and take their crown at their pocket and rock it. And the adults in that space have to feel whole. They have to feel loved and valued. And so just appreciated being in the space. Thank you for all of you all for your genius. And thank you for your facilitation, Brother Will.
No, and I appreciate it. You're welcome. And thank you all. And I have a great team that really supported me with this. And also Nancy was very supportive and motivating. And you guys just really acknowledge, like I said, this panel discussion took me to the panel discussion Tuesday where Dr. Wesley said from the Maasai tribe, they would always check on the children. They said, how are the children? And what you guys just did was brought me back to that, because the children are our future. We say that, right? They're going to be the ones that's going to be serving us at the restaurants, working, creating technology, driving on the road with us. And when I get older, I know I'm not going to be as quick as I am, but I just appreciate you all for this real conversation. We still have over 250 people on this call midday that stuck with us for an extra 30 minutes that we didn't even ask them to stick with us for. And so I just want to say that we are going to continue this webinar series. I know the superintendent is already talking about, Will, when is the next one? So we're going to be putting some dates out in the chat. And before we go into resources, let me just pivot real quick to our Deputy Superintendent, Nancy Portillo, ask her if she maybe has a few words for about 33 seconds, and then we'll pivot back to Superintendent Thurman. And if he takes over a minute, I'm gonna put him on mute because we've got to get these resources. So Deputy Superintendent Portillo, do you want to say anything before we really say thank you to our panelists?
I will be 18 seconds, Director McGee. So I just wanted to thank everyone here on the panel for all of your work and all of your leadership. I do want to give a very important shout out and plug, just stating that we are working here at the California Department of Education on updating our guidance, our discipline guidance as well. So I just wanted to share that that will be coming out shortly, more to come. This feedback, this conversation, and this dialogue were very informative, just in terms of, the things that need to be mentioned and brought to the top in this guidance. So I just wanted to share that out with you all here today. So thank you again for all of your work, your leadership, and your inspirational words. Bringing it back to the kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And I want to say too, that we had representatives from CDE all over this topic, you guys, for the community to know that we've had representation from several divisions. We also have a variety of our branches in the audience as well, listening to this topic. My team is here in full force because they are taking back what they've learned, and they're looking at how we shape our technical assistance to the field. So Superintendent Thurman, did you want to come on and say any last words before we move into resources for the field?
Thank you, Director McGee. You know, I was going to just get on and say how great the facilitation was by you, Director McGee, but then you gave me 35 seconds to talk. And I thought, wait a minute. But you're right. We don't need to take up a lot of time. We need to just be about the work. And so I'll just say thank you to Deputy Superintendent Portillo for reminding folks that guidance is coming. There are a lot of questions and interests. Thank you, Director McGee, to you and your team, and to the Deputy Superintendent Portillo for all the work to put this together. You know, my heart is full just listening to the presenters. Brother Chapman, thank you. You know, I know we had a chance to work with you and the Kingmakers youth groups during COVID, and you helped us as we got started on creating our own statewide youth advisory council. I'm hoping that we can connect. We intend to do some things and have the Kingmakers come back and do some more presentations. Dr. Wilkerson, always a pleasure. We thank you for helping to just keep us steeped in knowledge and practice and to push us. And Dr. Darling Hammond, you know, again, always helping us to have access to the best research and best practices. You know, Dr. Brawley, you had me at your opening statement when you said that you moved from 50-some% graduation rate to 98%, and the intentionality and all the programs that you talked about. And Dr. Gothall, you know, when you said that you hadn't expelled a student in 30+ years, you know, I had to pick myself up off the floor, and then I was dancing. I had my camera off, but I was dancing because I think it takes that level of belief system for us to make these changes. And so I'm just grateful to all of you. And Will, when you brought up the program that you had at your school that was modeled off of the McCallum Youth Court, I just thought that's something that we should really come back to and maybe even engage our Youth Advisory Council. So I know I've exceeded my 35 seconds, but I just wanted to be in gratitude to everyone and thank our interpreters who were here providing ASL interpretation. Thank you so much.
Oh, you got it. And thank you, Superintendent. I was going to put you on mute, but you were doing such a great job. So we appreciate it. So if we could just put the slide deck up real quick. Also, we will ask you all to really complete a survey that will be put in the chat. Let us know where we did well today. Let us know where we can improve. And then also let us know where you want us to focus our topics for our future webinars so we can ensure that it's beneficial to you all that are participating. We will also be taking the questions from the chat and be responding to those. So as we're closing out, here are several resources that we have out from the Department of Education. As Nancy mentioned, we are working on updating guidance, adding to it to really support the field. In 2013, the legislature approved Assembly Bill 420, which prohibited suspensions on willful defiance. California Ed Code talks about alternatives to suspension. And then also Ed Code provides that a superintendent of the school or district and principal is encouraged to use alternatives. So think about that. What is alternatives? We spoke about restorative practices. We have community service that can be assigned. There are alternatives to excluding children. When we exclude, they don't feel a part of the community. Next slide, please. MTSS was mentioned by several members of our panel. We've also received information from the field about where they're utilizing MTSS, positive behavior interventions and support, and how that's shown to have a positive effect for children at all school, for all children, in particular our Black children. So please continue to bring those to the forefront. There's also exceptions for suspension, including supervised suspension. So ensuring that suspension is the last means of what we're going into our toolbox for. And as the questions came through, we'll be addressing other tools. And then on the slide deck that you all will receive, there's some video and resources to support with schools that also speak about restorative practices. Next slide, please. This last slide here, or not last slide, but this last slide of specific resources with links are different things that we have out from the CDE. So people were asking about some resources in the question and answer area. Please check these links out. And again, the slide deck will be made readily available to you all. but there are several links to help LEAs throughout the system incorporate MTSS, mental health, social emotional. I didn't know anything about social and emotional learning until I became a principal, and I said, wow, this really helps out. And then I had to address my own social and emotional needs to be the best I could for children. Last few slides, please. The California Department of Education does support our individuals with disabilities. And so this is just information on the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. Our director from the Special Education Division was here today, and she lends her full support in supporting our efforts. And the next slide, please. This talks about how CDE addresses disproportionality for discipline. So that was a question that was asked in the chat, and we'll be delving more into that at our series. And then our last slide, please, talks about the disproportionality approach. And so again, we'll definitely schedule time so we can go deeper into this. We want to ensure that all children get what they need, and we want to also ensure that we are not continuing the disproportionate discipline practices in our school. And then our last slide will close us out. We appreciate you all for attending. Thank you to our great panel. Thank you to the president of the State Board of Education, Linda Darling-Hammond, for giving us great remarks. To our superintendent, who's been dashing around the Capitol, advocating for all children, including children of color. We appreciate you, as well as my team and the various divisions and branches of the CDE. Please join us March 3rd for a chronic absenteeism webinar, where we'll be talking about that and strategies on combating chronic absenteeism, as well as March 23rd, strategies to help California students reach our goal of reading by the 3rd grade. We know that's important, as well as please complete our feedback survey to help us learn and grow so we can continue to improve how we deliver our webinars to the field and what you all really want us to follow up on. And with that said, we hope that you guys are being successful. Hats off to a great school year. Thoughts, love, and prayers. And we appreciate you guys joining us. Thank you.